Amen. Would you guys turn to your neighbor? Just kidding. That's just a little coronavirus joke, everybody. So I got to try something. You know, it's an odd day. Yesterday we went out to lunch, and there was a lot of people out actually, but everybody just looked really sad, which I get. There's kind of like a heaviness going on. We are pausing kind of our normal series because we've been in this series called Dollars and Cents and talking about how to handle our finances in healthy ways and godly ways. But we wanted to pause that because we are all experiencing something that we've never really experienced before. And when we do something like that, when we kind of step into something like that, it's new. And so we kind of have the option of reacting to it or responding to it. We have the coronavirus, and then we see the stock markets are doing like backflips and somersaults, and then the grocery stores and trying to get basic supplies. And the scariest thing of all is I found out that my kids don't have school until April 13th. And so it's just, there's like so many things for us that are unknown, and we're trying to figure it out. And it's hard when things are unknown like this, and it's hard when things are continually changing because it leaves us with this feeling like all we can do is react to what is happening moment by moment. But the wise thing to do, and it's not easy and it's not always very clear, but is to decide, how do I want to respond versus just reacting? When we react, it's just kind of a knee-jerk reaction to what we're experiencing, what we're hearing, what we're seeing. But when we make a choice and say, hey, I want to respond intentionally with purpose for a reason. I want to do this for a certain reason in a certain way. That's what I want to talk about today. How do we respond to the fear and the anxiety and the worry, the chaos, the things that people are talking about, the things that we're seeing, the things that we're feeling? How do we choose to respond to that in a different way? Because fear is a really challenging thing. Some of you guys have always really there's certain kinds of people that always wrestle with fear. That fear is something that's very common for you. Some of you guys should have felt a little bit more fear earlier in your lives than you feel this week. But there's this fear piece for us, and throughout the scriptures, one of the most common commands is do not fear. Fear not. It's a repeating command all throughout the scripture. And so what does it look like for us to not fear when things seem so fearful? What does it look like for us to not worry or to choose how we respond to these things in the face of so much? One of the things I think it's important to talk about is that this reality that fear is the byproduct of our ability to imagine, to accumulate knowledge, and to project into the future. It's the byproduct of our ability to imagine, to accumulate knowledge, and to project in the future. It's kind of like a big sentence with a lot of different words, but essentially what it's saying is that our ability as humans, it's a gift that we have that makes us uniquely human, is we get to take these experiences from the past and we project them into the future. We take knowledge and information and we say, okay, here's how I believe that this will play out. And so that gives us, that's kind of what fear is, a byproduct of this ability that we have, is to say, hey, I've seen this happen in the past, and so here's what I think might happen in the future. Or we hear what the news is talking about, or we see pictures of the grocery stores, and we get this information, and based off that information that we've accumulated, we project things into the future. And oftentimes, if it goes unchecked, we just really project fear. It's this thing that we go to, but it's not only negative things that we project into the future. We've all had the moments where we've said the phrase, I can't wait. Like, I can't wait for this trip. I can't wait for this vacation. I can't wait for dinner. I can't wait for whatever it might be for me to be able to touch my face without feeling like I'm going to transmit something terrible. Has anybody else realized how much you touch your face over the last week? It's like, oh my gosh. But this phrase, I can't wait, is that same thing. It's that same ability that we have to project into the future. It's saying, based off the information that I have accumulated, here's what I imagine in the future, and I can't wait. I'm so excited. We have the ability to project hope into the future, excitement, peace, fun, joy, or fear, anxiety, worry. We have the ability to project these things into the future. None of us want to be controlled by fear. I know I don't. Jesus had a lot to say about it, but whenever he did talk about fear, it was always these really small statements that were, not, it didn't seem very helpful. For example, oftentimes he would say this: "Fear not." Cool. Thanks, Jesus. We've had those experiences in our lives when somebody's like, "Well, just don't worry. Just don't worry about it. Don't let it get to you." It's these things that almost seem dismissive. When 2 words was not enough, he would expand it to 3 words, and he would say things like this: "Don't be afraid." Again, thank you, Jesus. Now, he talked about fear a lot, and we actually saw him navigate these situations a lot. And I want to look at a specific story today because, yes, he said these statements like "fear not" and "don't be afraid," but the way that he lived and the way that he modeled this for the disciples and for people around, we can learn so much from this. And so we're going to be in Matthew chapter 8, verse 23 through 27. This is a story that many of us may be familiar with. If you've been around church or if you've grown up in church, you may kind of have become familiar with this story, but I think it's a helpful thing for us to kind of see this in a new lens. It says this: "Then he," talking about Jesus, "he got into the boat and his disciples followed him. Suddenly, a furious storm came up on the lake, so that the waves swept over the boat." Now, just for reference, the boats that they would have been on were fishing boats, and at this point in time, the fishing boats they sat really low in the water, and they would use nets to pull these things up by hand, pull the fish up by hand. And so this is not some big yacht or schooner or massive kind of fishing vessel. This is like an oversized dinghy. I mean, this is a crazy situation. They're sitting in here, and this area, the storms, the wind would come over through the valley, and they would hit this body of water, and it's still, to this day, the storms kick up at a very surprising pace. And so they're in this situation, they're in this boat, the storm comes, and the waves are at a point where they're washing over the side of the boat. And then it says, "But Jesus was sleeping." Which is kind of interesting to think about, the chaos. And I don't know if you guys have been on a boat in choppy waters, let alone like a huge storm, but it can be a really scary thing. It's very noisy. There is so much sound of wind and all the things that are happening. And all of this is going on, and Jesus was sleeping. And I imagine it looking something a little bit like this. That was my 4-year-old this morning. My sweet little angel when he's sleeping. This is kind of what I imagine Jesus looking like. Probably not with the adorable plaid pajamas and everything, but there's this reality where they are freaking out. They are scared. They are nervous. They are overwhelmed with all this going on around them, and they turn back to Jesus, their teacher, their rabbi, the one that they're following, the one that they're starting to believe is the Savior, the source of hope, the source of life, source of strength. So they turn back to receive this, and he is sleeping. And I can't help but think that for many of us, whether it's this week with all that's going on around the world with the coronavirus, for many of us, whether it's with our marriages or our relationships or our friends, whether it's our health, maybe it's our finances, our careers, there's so many things right now that just feel so chaotic, like a storm that has just sprung up and is overwhelming us. And we turn to Jesus, who we have been told is our source of strength, and it feels like he is sleeping, just conked out, totally unaware that the world is crumbling. Many of us have had this feeling. Many of us have had this experience. And it's an interesting thing because just because we feel this way, and in the disciples' situation, just because he was actually asleep, does not mean that we should be freaking out more. The story goes on. It says the disciples went and woke him, saying, "Jesus, are you awake?" No, I'm just kidding. I would assume they're yelling, either because it was chaotic and noisy and there was a storm and they had to talk at that volume, or because they were terrified, or because they were angry. I don't think that this was a calm thing. The disciples go and they say, "Lord, save us. We are going to drown." And he replies, "You of little faith." You kind of picture Jesus like rolling up on his elbow. "You of little faith. Why are you so afraid?" Now, before we go on, we know why they're afraid. Because most of these guys are fishermen. They all live in this region. They've heard stories. They've experienced themselves. What does it mean to be on the water when a storm like this comes? They have heard stories. They have had their own experiences. And they are taking that information and they are projecting it into the future, which is something we all do. And so that's why they're afraid. They are taking the unknown, the past experiences, merging it together, and their imagination is giving them more than enough reasons to be afraid. This is an ability that we all have. This is something that we're all even experiencing right now. We're projecting into the future, and it looks bleak, scary, unknown, chaotic, whatever it might be. We all are experiencing this in some way. Jesus says, "Why are you so afraid?" And then he got up, he rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed, and they asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the winds and the waves obey him." Now, this story is something that, a few of the disciples wrote about their experience here. This was Matthew that we're reading about, but Mark, when he was writing about this story, he talks about how they were amazed. And then he said this line, Mark, when he wrote his gospel, he said that they feared a great fear, which is an interesting phrase. They were afraid, and then they were afraid. They were afraid of the storm. They thought that they were going to die. They thought that Jesus was literally just sleeping through their demise. They were afraid of what was happening all around them, what they were experiencing, and what might be to come. And then when Jesus spoke and he calmed the storm in this way, all of a sudden, what they were afraid of was no longer the thing that they were afraid of. And there was something that shifted in them. There was something that changed their perspective. The new fear was greater than their previous fear. This idea of Jesus having the power to calm the storm became greater than the power of the storm. Someone became greater than something. And for just a moment, because literally in the next chapter of Matthew, and then like a dozen more times, they become terrified again of different things. But for just a moment, their confidence in Jesus overwhelmed their fear of the storm. For just that moment, when he spoke and the storm calmed and the wind stopped, for just a moment, they had this reality check, this vision, this understanding that this man has the ability to calm the storm. And that caused in them a deeper sense of fear, of reverence, of reality than what the storm and their potential loss of life was, because they realized the power that Jesus had. The faith in Jesus for a few moments exceeded their fear of the storm. And Jesus wanted them, and I think he wants us to learn this lesson from this story, that we don't have to let fear rule over our lives, even when we are in the boat, even when it feels like he is asleep, even when everything around us feels chaotic and uncertain, and the wind is blowing different ways, and there's waves crashing over, and you turn to look at your friend who you trust, and they're a fisherman also, and they've spent time on the water, and so surely they're going to give you a reassuring look back, and you look at them, and they're freaking out too. The people that you've always gone to say, hey, if they're calm, then I'll be calm too. If they're okay, then I can be okay too. And we're looking, and everybody seems like they're freaking out. The people, the news, the social media accounts, whatever it is that we previously would look at for some sense of reality or foundation or confidence, everybody in the boat is freaking out a little bit. We've all had this experience, and I think that this story has lasted for 2,000 years, because I think that it still has purpose for us today to learn, to experience it. Because the reality is that in the same way that in the face of the unknown, we can project the information that we've accumulated and have fear about what is to come. In that same way, we can also look back at who Jesus is, what God has done in our lives and in our communities, and we can project that into the unknown. And it's unknown for us in a way, but it's not unknown for God. It's not a curious tale that will be unraveled for Jesus. There's a sense of confidence of knowing who is in control and that God is with us. We have the choice. And so I want to just give us kind of some practical ways that we can start to change from the tendency that we have to project fear into the future. What can we do to take the information that we have and the past experiences, and how can we project something different into the future, something more hopeful, something more meaningful for our own hearts and for our own minds? And so it feels just kind of silly to say, like, here's 3 things, but here's 3 things. I want to give us something practical, because now, don't get me wrong, I'm not, in any way, I'm not trying to diminish what Jesus said when he said, fear not. I'm not trying to diminish what Jesus said when he said, don't be afraid. But I also don't want anything here to sound dismissive or to just seem like in some way like, hey, you know what? You should just have more faith. You know what? You should just believe. And if you don't believe, then there's a problem with you. I want us to figure out, okay, Jesus said that we shouldn't be afraid, and there's an invitation for us to not be afraid. And what does that process look like? What does it look like for us to believe that he is in the boat with us? And for the disciples, he was literally asleep. But to know that he is in the middle of the storm with us, what does it look like for us to hold on to that? So here's kind of what I've come up with over the last few days that I wanted to share with you guys. The first thing, the action step that we can do to not be afraid is to be selective with input. We are all inputting all day long. For some of us, it's mostly food. But we are all inputting social media, news. We're inputting all kinds of different messages. You can turn on any channel at any point in time right now, and there is information about how terrifying and unknown this situation is that we're currently in. You can open up Facebook, and you will find no less than 24 home health remedies and essential oils that will keep you safe from the coronavirus. You can open up Instagram and you can see people making jokes. We can have all kinds of input, and even the people that we surround ourselves with and we have in our lives, and we as adults have to decide, okay, how am I going to limit and be mindful of the input that I'm allowing in my life? Because our brains and our hearts were not wired to be able to handle the weight of the world. Our brains and our hearts were not wired to be able to handle all of the bad news and all of the trauma that everyone is experiencing at the same time. And that does not mean that we should be calloused. It means that we should be mindful of what we're allowing to fill our hearts and our minds, because we cannot handle all of it. We're not supposed to. We're not wired that way. So what does it look like for us to be selective with the input? Not only for ourselves, but even when we're with our friends that maybe haven't made these intentional decisions, and we can be a source of hope for them because we haven't been weighed down by 50 different people's viewpoints on the unknown future. We can be a source of hope for them, not just for our friends and for our family, but what does it look like for us to do this for the sake of our kids and the youth and the students that are in our lives? I want my kid to keep sleeping like he was in that picture. I want him to keep sleeping. He knows that there's something going on. My 8-year-old knows that there's something going on. They're out of school. They've talked about it at school. They know that there's something going on. I do not want his heart or his mind to be filled with terror because of what I allow him to see all day long and hear all day long, even in the conversations that Ez and I have. It doesn't mean that we're sticking our head in the sand or trying to deny what's happening. It just means, how do we be mindful and selective with the input? And a way to choose not only to avoid certain things or to limit certain things, but to choose how to focus on certain things. And I had hoped that this would be able to be done by this morning, but we don't have it yet. All of these links we'll put up on our social media, and you guys will be able to access it. But we're putting together playlists of worship music. And some of you guys are like, man, I've never listened to worship music outside of that first 15 minutes at church. But the reality is, when we're allowing that type of input, it's reminding us of the truth of who God is, even when the circumstances feel uncertain. Even what we're feeling doesn't feel like God is loving. When we're feeling like God might not be in control, we're reminding ourselves that our feelings are not always correct. They're not always true. we are feeling those things, but when we input these worship songs, these lyrics, these words, these ideas, they redirect and they reshape our hearts. Another thing that we're putting together, it's actually already available, is a page on our website specifically for families that have kids. So southhills.org/online-kids. We have all of the video lessons for our Sunday morning message. We've got some questions and some ways to talk about these types of things with kids of different ages, because we want to make sure that we are helping you guys and helping the people in our community do the best they can to be mindful of the input. What are we allowing to fill our hearts and fill our minds in this time? The second thing, after being selective with our input, is to be generous with hope. This last week, one of our good friends that lives out of state, they were selected to be on a new game show that's not aired yet. And I'm not supposed to say what it's going to air on, but the channel is run by a mouse. So you can... Okay. Anyway, so it's a big family, but only 4 of them could be on the show. So they had asked us, like, hey, when we fly out, can you guys hang out with our younger kids? And we said, absolutely. So they flew in Wednesday to LAX. Just a vision of peacefulness. And they got to the hotel, and it was pouring rain all week. And so besides all of the coronavirus stuff, like the weather just feels like ominous this week, and there's so many different things. And so Thursday comes, and they have to go to the studio to film. And so we get in the car and head on the 405 to go to LA. And we get there, and so we get into the hotel. We're running through, and it's kind of like an indoor-outdoor situation. So we're kind of going through the rain and under the covers, and we get into the elevator area, and we're trying to like shoo all of the kids in the elevator. And there's a few other people in the elevator, and I, like, out of the corner of my eye, I see this guy, and I'm like, oh, that guy looks like that guy from The Bachelor. But I'm not like a starer type of person. And so I like look down. And then after an appropriate amount of time, I looked back up and I was like, oh, that is that guy from The Bachelor. It was Pilot Pete and Madison. And some of you guys are like, I don't know who that is. And I thought we were at church. And some of you guys don't care anything about the Bible anymore because I saw somebody from The Bachelor. And you're like, yeah, tell me more about that story. But literally, we end up in an elevator with these 2 people that we had just been watching on TV the night before and judging their lives, obviously. And we're in this elevator, and some miraculous thing happened, and my wife didn't ask for a photograph and all these types of things. But as everybody was kind of getting off the elevator on their own floors, they got off on the 4th floor. We took note. And then we went up to the next floor, and then we walked down the stairs. No, I was kidding. We go up, and I had made some sort of like silly dad joke. Like, it wasn't a good joke. Most of my jokes aren't good. I get that. But everybody that was in the elevator, well, not everybody. My wife didn't laugh at it. But everybody else laughed at this joke. And this lady that was getting off, the door was closing, and she like stopped the door from closing and like stuck her head back in, and she said, thank you for giving us the chance to laugh. And both times I tell this story, I get like a little emotional. It was not a good joke. It wasn't really like a planned joke. It was some silly thing that I said. But it gave her and other people the opportunity to smile and laugh in a week, in a day that is filled with unknowns. Everybody at that hotel was there because they're traveling. And there's not... I can't imagine a more difficult spot to be in than not at home when it feels like everything is crumbling. I wasn't trying to be spiritual. I wasn't trying to be helpful. I just can't resist bad jokes. But there was a generosity of hope that was offered through that, through the opportunity to smile, to laugh. And as you guys are walking through the stripped bare aisles of your grocery stores, and you're looking at your neighbors who are trying to duck and cover and get into their patios and drive into their garages, what does it look like for us to be generous with hope and giving people a chance to smile, to laugh, to be kind to people, to share? How are we showing up in our homes with our families and kids and our roommates and friends? How are we showing up in our communities? This has to do with our attitudes and the things we say and the way that we act towards people. but it also has to do with physical needs. It is so sad to me that some people have mountains of toilet paper in their homes, and they are selling them for crazy prices. It's like, man, you don't need all of that, so how can we be generous? Rather than selfish, how can we be sacrificial? How can we take and meet practical needs for people in our communities and in our lives? And I think First Service thought that I was a joke, or not that I was a joke. Maybe. Yeah, thanks, Angie. But I think they thought that I was joking, but we have so much toilet paper here that probably won't get used very much over the next few weeks. And literally, if you guys need toilet paper, we have individually wrapped rolls of toilet paper. And you can take some with you, because I don't want you to be that smelly this week. But I mean, it's a very serious thing. Like, man, we have this. It's probably not going to get used over the next few weeks, so why don't you use it? Because some people literally cannot find it. There was people after First Service that were going to try and find toilet paper at the grocery stores. They've been looking for the last few days. It's a crazy world, but we can be generous with hope in our attitudes and in the ways that we show up. We can be generous with hope in the way that we care for people and share food or drinks or toilet paper or whatever it might be. One of the things that we were able to do this week is I actually wrote a letter. I typed up a little letter on my laptop, and I printed it out, and I dropped them off at the door of each one of the apartments in our complex. And I just said, hey, it's Chris. I live in apartment 3. I just want you to know I'm thinking about you, and we're here for you guys if you need anything. We have food. We have toilet paper. We have, let us know if there's anything that you need or if there's any way that we can help you, and know that we're praying for you and we're available if you guys need anything. And I put my name and my number and email address on there. And I got like 4 people responded to that to let me know how much they appreciated that, how much that meant to them. It's not that serious of a thing. It's not that big of a thing, but it's a way that we can help share hope in the midst of a crazy unknown time. And I promise you, the way that I felt when these people felt better, it made me feel like, man, we are still here. We're in it together. We're a part of this together. And so we're actually going to make, like, if you guys want to do that idea, we're going to make that template available if you guys want to share letters with your neighbors. So be selective with input. Be generous with hope. And the third one is to be constant in prayer. Now, for a lot of us, this feels like a tall order. Prayer for many people feels like this very mystical thing. Prayer for many people feels like a thing that only certain people can do. You have to have the certain kind of right words, or you have to say them in the right order to be able to unlock God's power in your life. And I want to just demystify that, because prayer is legitimately just us communicating with God. And it's us talking out loud with God. It's us, even if we just want to speak in our heads and in our hearts, we could say these types of things, but it's an intentional decision to speak with God. And when we do that, it reorients and it redirects our hearts from leaning towards fear and anxiety and worry to remembering, man, I have the opportunity to speak with God. And not only do I have that opportunity, but it's actually what he wants most. In Philippians chapter 4, it says, don't be anxious about things. Instead, pray. Which again, kind of feels a little bit like one of those, just pray about it, guys, and you'll feel better. But it's not that shallow. There's more to it. He says, pray about everything. He longs to hear your requests, so talk to God about your needs and be thankful for what has come. He says, God longs to hear from you. He wants to hear from you. He already knows what's going on in your heart and your mind, but he wants you to talk to him about it. The same way I can see my kid, my 8-year-old, I can see when he's struggling and he's frustrated and he's down about something. It's like, I know that he is, but I would love for him to talk to me about it. I want him to feel the confidence, the ability to talk to me about what he's dealing with. It says God longs for us. He longs to hear our requests. So talk to him about your needs. And then it says, and this is a really important thing, it says, and be thankful for what has come. And this again is an opportunity for us to redirect our hearts and to reorient our hearts, because all of a sudden we say, God, here's what I'm afraid of, and here's what I need, and I've got financial things. I mean, some people, you're looking at like a 2-week window with your finances, a 2-month window. You're not sure what the future looks like. There's health concerns. There's all kinds of stuff. And so we get to tell God what our needs are, and then we also get to remember what has come, the writer says. Remember what God has done, the way he has shown up, the way he has provided. And when we remember that, it helps us inform and imagine a future where he will continue to provide. We get to imagine a future where he continues to show up. He continues to be with us in the boat, in the storm, because I remember what happened when my marriage was struggling, and it felt like God was with me through that, and he pulled me through that. I remember what happened when I was terrified about my health, and God was able to pull me through that, and he was with me through that. I remember what happened when I was struggling with finances, and he was able to give me the wisdom or put people in my life. I remember what happened when I was lonely, and he provided community. When we remember what happens, it reorients our hearts. And so to be constant in prayer isn't to be necessarily, it may be, but it's not requiring us to be on our knees with candles lit around us, saying the exact perfect words in the exact perfect order. It's to say, God, I am scared right now, and I need your peace. I need your hope. I need an answer. I need wisdom. He longs to hear from you and to remember how he's shown up in our lives in the past. And then it goes on, and there's a promise that comes with this. It says, and know that the peace of God, which is a peace that is beyond any and all of our human understanding, will stand watch over your hearts and your minds in Jesus, the Anointed One. It's a peace that comes not because you have all the answers, or because you have enough toilet paper, or because you are, whatever it is. It's not a peace that really anybody should have based off of the circumstances. It's not a circumstantial peace. It's a peace that comes in the face of our circumstances. Even though it feels like it is all falling apart, even though everybody only has bad news, even though it feels like Jesus is asleep and the storm is chaotic, even in the midst of all these things, God offers us a peace. And it comes when we come to him and we say, God, here are my needs. Here are the ways I'm remembering that you've shown up in the past. And it says that this peace that comes that doesn't make any sense at all, but it will guard our hearts in chaotic times, in painful times, and in the unknown times. And so what I would love to do is just to take a moment and be able to pray for you and for myself, whether you're here, whether you're watching at home or wherever you might be. I want to be able to pray for us. And I'm trying my best to pray in the most simple, basic words possible, because I want you to be able to remember that you can do this too. I want you to be able to remember that you can talk to God, and he longs for that to happen. So if you guys would bow your heads with me.